welcoming again to Higher PhD's alternative career path success story now on YouTube. So one of Higher PhD Career Society's mission is to help talents with advanced degree navigate careers outside of academy. PhD and Masters, we learn so many transferable skills that can be applicable to many jobs and industries, not just your thesis topic, right? But however, the challenge is that in academics, we're not exposed to the job options outside of the academy. So this talk series objectives is to showcase stories of people who have made a successful transition outside of academy to a career path you might or might not know about. So we try to find speakers who you can relate to, who have gone through challenges, struggles, or to work hard to make it to where they are today. David, I hope that's you.
Yeah.
And so I hope that everyone here, after you seeing this, you can come out of it saying, yeah, I can do it too. I can be David. So today we're so fortunate to have David Moscrop here today. So I won't be introducing him about his background because he will tell you all about him. But let's start from David. You want to tell us about yourself?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I'll give you the quick rundown. I'm currently a journalist, writer, and podcaster. We can get into all those details later, but I write for a handful of magazines and newspapers. I've written for the Globe and Mail, the Washington Post, the National Post, the Maclean's, the Guardian, here, there, and everywhere. So I've been kind of all over the place. And I did a master's in political theory at the University of Ottawa. And I taught overseas for about 19 months in Korea between that and my PhD. And then I did a PhD at UBC. We were there at the same time. And then a couple of postdocs. I did a postdoc at Simon Fraser University and a postdoc at the University of Ottawa, a Shirk postdoc, and then became a full-time journalist, writer in the last actually few years, but I've been working on that for quite a long time. And that's the sort of arc of how I ended up where I am right now.
And I heard you just published a new book, is that right?
I published, it was out just pre-pandemic, and we're just about to record it as an audiobook, and we're just about to start selling it in the United States. And I'm working on a second book now, which should be a couple years in the making. It's a little bit late, but the pandemic got in the way, as it did for many people, many things.
Yeah, so how did you go from political science PhD all the way to publishing books and being a journalist and those glamorous jobs?
It was a pretty, it's very, there are occasionally days where it actually does feel glamorous, but day to day, it often feels like a bit of like you're a bit of a pin cushion, but but it's actually quite a nice job in many ways. And I ended up doing it in a bit of a, let's say, atypical way, a bit of a circuitous way, through years of just doing it. Because you can go to journalism school to become a journalist, but you don't have to, and some people don't. I didn't. I've never been in journalism school. In fact, I taught a course in journalism school at Carleton this year, but that was the first time I'd ever been part of a journalism school. I had spent my time learning about politics, and through that process had read a lot and thought a lot. I had learned about critical thinking and had learned about research and had learned how to write, something that I had also learned working on the student paper at the University of Ottawa. So I had sort of been developing those skills early. But even through my PhD years, I was working on the side, writing as much as I could for magazines and newspapers, just getting a sense of it. And you just did it by trying to get in, meeting people, doing good work, following up, being persistent, and learning as you went. And I kept doing that, and over, through the years, over time, I was able to kind of build a network of folks and some trust, and then you keep getting invited back, and before you know it, you've become a journalist. Wow. And as for the book, it was actually my thesis. It was my PhD thesis. I did something that you're not really meant to do unless you want to leave academia, which is I took my thesis and I turned it into a mass market book. Not an academic book. And that was a real clear signal that I wanted people to read it. not to be
Yeah.
not to, I don't want to offend academics, but the fact is, most academic books don't get a lot of readership. I wanted people to read this. I wanted it to be an accessible book for the public at large, for policymakers, for other, non-expert experts, right? So folks who are expert in one area, but not necessarily in this one. So someone came along and said to me, "Oh, we know you write here and there. Do you maybe want to write a book?" And I said, "Well, I've got this thesis. It's a big idea book waiting to happen, so I can do it." So we took that, and that was the basis of what became a kind of accessible book that has been a huge part of my career. So, in that sense, not only did I transition out of academia, but I actually specifically used the research that I had been doing in academia to help make that transition.
That is I think it's a lot of dream come trues for so many people who are listening right now. I have so many questions. Where do I start? So did you actually know what you want to be? Like, did you know you want to be a journalist or
No,
publish? No.
no, not at all. I'd wanted to write a book for a long time, but I had and had long wanted to be an author. And me and my friends have been writing for years on the internet. We had blogs, for instance. We wrote in local papers. We wrote for a small outlet called Open File, which is sort of where we learned some of our journalism. We wrote in university for the university paper. So, we had the sense that we wanted to write. But eventually I decided I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to be an academic. And that's what I thought I was going to do when I went to UBC. That was the plan. And as it went on, I found that the PhD process stripped away so much of what I loved about academia, about learning, about thinking, about talking to people, about ideas. They commodified it. They turned it into this sort of almost rote process of publishing stuff that I didn't really want to publish for the people who really didn't want to read it. And I felt that was deeply alienating. And on top of that, I started staring down a job market that was not favorable, and in which a lot of very, very talented people who worked very hard and who were very kind and were great to work with were having a hard time getting jobs, and would sometimes have to try to find jobs in places they didn't want to be. And I thought, what, that's not for me. And so before I knew it, that my part-time side hustle of writing and journalism and podcasting had become my full-time job, and academia had just sort of fallen away. But it wasn't until the pandemic that I officially fully went full-time freelance writing, podcasting, and book writing. But before that, I had still been doing postdoc work right up until 2020. Because I had still kind of kept one foot in academia, publishing, teaching, researching as best I could. And then finally, that was the end of it. Although, fun fact, I did actually, like I said, I wrote or I taught a course this fall, but I actually wrote an academic paper for fun in the winter. Someone asked me, "Do you want to write for an edited volume?" And I wrote it because I didn't feel the publishing pressure or the pressures of the industry anymore. I could just do it for fun like I used to. And a little bit of that passion came back. It didn't make me want to go back, but it actually reminded me of why I left. But I kind of enjoyed the process anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of similar like me, right? Like a lot of people know I tried different industry now. I'm a project manager in the gaming studio. It's like so far away
That's for me, that's the dream.
Oh,
That's my
yeah. It is dream now. I'm in the dreamland, and I still teach on the side, for fun. Yeah,
And
I'm so
it
glad
does
to.
become fun, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it regains some of the fun you had when you just sort of were doing it because it was interesting. Like I remember in undergrad, late high school and then in early undergrad, going away and just being in love with learning. And it sounds so corny, but it was true. I just loved reading and thinking and talking and working through ideas and debating and discussing just for the sake of it. That later, when it became a kind of a career path with all the imperatives and the hurdles that come with that, it lost a lot of that magic. And that was the beginning of the end for it. But I was lucky to be able to have a kind of side hustle that I've made work. And journalism's tough for that. But I'll say this before I forget it. The best advice I've ever heard in my entire life about how to make something like this work was from a Neil Gaiman commencement speech that was turned into a book. And the speech was called Make Good Art. And he says freelancers, people like me, get and keep work for 3 reasons. People like them, they do good work, and they do it on time. And 2 out of 3 is usually enough. And I've never in my life heard a better account of how people can make a career like mine work.
Like liking somebody is such a important factor that people might undervalue. I hear that about freelancer, contractor. How do you make contractor job work? And the answer that I keep hearing is networking, and then show people you can do good work. Would you resonate with that?
That is exactly it. I mean, so it's funny enough. I mean, I studied the psychology of political decision making for my PhD. My book was about political decision making. And one of the big takeaways from that research is we are not rational, dispassionate, calculating machines like we're told we are through the Enlightenment lens, but rather we are fundamentally emotional and relational beings. And part of that being is, well, there are people we like and people we don't. And we want to help people we like, and we want good things to happen to people we like, and people we don't like, not so much. So, becoming someone who people like ends up being a core part of not just your social life, but your career life too, your work life, because people like people they like, and they want good things to happen to them, and they want to help them. And so that's been a part of quite naturally, not cynically, but quite naturally been a part of my career, as has helping other people. I mean, part of being liked is genuinely being kind to people. Part of it is being an ally and a resource for folks, and being there to help them do things, because we're all trying to get through the day. We're all trying to make our own hustle pay off, and that often requires help. And when you can step in and help people remember that. So, being someone that people want to work with, being someone who people like, makes a big difference. And then on top of that, though, you've got to deliver, and ideally deliver on time, which I mostly do. That gets a little trickier when you get, become a resource, because you end up getting sometimes more work than you can handle, but delivering more or less on time goes a long way too.
Yeah, I totally resonate. It's a lot of the time people ask, like, how do I find a job? And networking, okay, how do I network? I never needed to really apply for a job, because people come ask me. And why? I think something that might resonate is because I just like helping people. I didn't think about what will come back to me, and just somehow those kind of good deeds will just pass along, and when I needed it, come back to me somehow.
100%. And people can tell when you're being transactional and cynical. And in some industries, that's how it works. In some places, that's how it works. They can tell, though, when that's the case, and they can tell when you genuinely just want to help. The thing about the transactional approach is that it creates very thin bonds that are very easy to break. When it's not transactional and you genuinely help people because you want to help them and you build a relationship out of that, the bonds are thicker and much harder to break, and then tend to return much better returns, even though that's not the point of it, right? It's just the nature of things. Think of what you do for family and friends, and what they would do for you, and how thick those bonds are. Well, you can make those with people in your work network too, non-cynically. And it pays off. It's a kind of twofer.
Yeah, to take this advice, this is from a person who does PhD on this topic. Right?
And then later lived it through a career a second time. I was lucky that a lot of things lined up. But there's a great old line that it sort of comes from Picasso, but a Canadian artist who I was interviewing once said it to the late Christopher Pratt, the painter, once said to me, "Luck should find you at work." And I remember I was sitting in the National Gallery of Canada as a student journalist at the Fulcrum at the University of Ottawa, interviewing this guy while sitting among his paintings. And all the patrons of the museum were kind of walking around, having no idea that the artist whose show it was sitting right there on the bench. And I remember him saying to me, luck should find you at work. And that stuck with me. Was, and especially in a job like this, in a career like this, you got to do a lot of stuff. And someday just feels like luck has made all the difference and you got there because you were lucky. But the fact is you got lucky because you sat down and you did the work day after day after day. And one day your number came up. But if you hadn't been doing it, the probability of your number coming up would have been much lower. So a lot of this really is, whether it's networking or projects or specific pieces you're writing or job applications or whatever it might be, a huge part of that success is simply keeping at it. And it also makes me think of James Baldwin, the American writer James Baldwin, who said something to the effect of, talent is insignificant. I know a lot of talented ruins, but the thing that stands out for him, he says, is persistence, basically, right? There's that persistence is the thing that makes all the difference. So that combination of persistence and patience, as well as being kind and useful and delivering on time and delivering good stuff, is just going to set you up for probable success in the long run.
Yeah, I think this is another thing that we keep hearing is a lot of the people we invite are people like you. I'm like, wow, like how it's impossible for me to be like David. But when we actually dig into your story, it's all hard work, persistent, like you're saying. It doesn't come in one day. It's all
and it's totally possible. And it's totally possible, and I like to think of these through these stories and in these quotations because it helps me make sense of it. There's what is probably an apocryphal story about Picasso, and sort of doodling on a napkin and then throwing it away, and somebody saying, "Well, can I have that?" And him saying, "Yeah, it'll be 20,000 francs or whatever it might be." And someone saying, "Well, that took you 30 seconds," and he said, "No, it took me 30 years," right? And the point of the story, again, apocryphal as it surely is that you, through the long term, develop skills that become useful to people that also further your aims. And I sort of thought, well, how in God's name did I end up writing a book, and now I'm writing a novel, and now I've got a podcast, and now I've got, writing for big newspapers and magazines? When did I learn that? And the answer was, oh my God, I've been learning it for 20 years by reading books and writing papers and writing articles and writing opinion pieces for, the Ottawa Citizen or the Open File, all the way up to the Washington Post, the Guardian. And I had been training all that time. I didn't think of it as training because I wasn't in school. I wasn't working with a coach. I was like, well, I'm just doing it. But I was figuring it out. And I was figuring it out in the real world by doing it. And that, before you know it, you wake up and, you've put in the time and you've developed these skills that are marketable and transferable and valuable. And I could leave journalism. I don't think I will, but I could leave journalism and say, go to communications or something like that, as many journalists do, because those skills are highly transferable. So it ends up being quite a valuable portfolio of skills that you end up with that you sometimes don't even notice that you're building.
And now I'm like gonna shift the gear a little bit and ask people are wondering, how is your day-to-day looks like?
I couldn't tell you. It's so weird. I wrote 3 pieces yesterday, which I gotta say, I highly do not recommend people do. It was not pleasant. I was very cranky. I barely had time to take my dog for a walk. And when I can't walk the dog, I get cranky. When I can't go running outside, I get cranky. But the closest I have to a typical day is I kind of wake up late. I like to sleep in. I'll read for a little bit, and then I will check my email real quick and sit down and get to the first part of the project. And that is usually a piece I have to write. So I'm like, okay, I gotta sit down. I gotta write this thing, and then I will write it. And that means reading a bunch of news, reading some books, maybe reading some articles occasionally, calling some people up and interviewing them. And then I write the thing and then send it off. And then I take a break for lunch, maybe go for a run, take the dog out. And then when I've got my energy back up after that, I come back and sometimes I have to write a second piece or even a third piece, but otherwise I'll sit down and do administrative work, the day-to-day stuff. I try to keep it inbox zero. I get it about 90% of the time. So I keep the inbox nice and light. I read a bunch of stuff to see if there's story ideas out there or people I want to talk to. And then I get back to reading. But, basically, I kind of imagine the day as having one good section for a project that I have to get done, and then all the rest of the stuff that I got to do. My goal is every day to sit down and do a part of at least one project, record a podcast, write a story, work on a chapter of the book. And because right now I'm working on the novel, I've altered things a little bit. Now my day is sectioned into 3 sections. One section for writing whatever I got to write that day or recording, a second section for administrative work, and a third section dedicated to the novel. And that's the 1, 2, 3. And then within that, I find at least 3 periods a day, morning, afternoon, and then before bed, to read for 20, 30, 40 minutes. I'm trying to get about 100 books done this year, because reading a lot makes all the difference. First of all, I love it, but it makes a lot of difference in my career too. And that my target is 90 minutes a day of reading. And so I make sure there's always time for that. And that sounds like a lot. And some days it is a lot, but I still have time to hang out, cook meals, walk the dog, go for a run, and at night just sit on the couch and watch a movie or watch some TV and play Stardew Valley on my Switch, right? Like if you're very efficient with your time and you stick to that schedule, it ends up producing a lot of stuff over time.
It sounds like a lot of discipline. How do you develop that system for yourself?
I developed it like a lot of people, and certainly a lot of people in my business. I'm a bit lazy by nature and tend to procrastinate. And that is a problem, because you have to deliver something. And if you don't deliver something, people don't pay you. It's not like you can kind of like in an office hide for a week or two and sort of slow down your work. And people are like, well, why are things slowed down? I can't tell. Sometimes there are jobs where you can hide for a little bit. In this job, you can't hide at all. If you don't deliver the thing you got to deliver, you don't get paid. And people know. So I'm in that sense driven by the fact that I've got very short deadlines every single week. And so I have no choice but to be disciplined, because otherwise the whole thing would fall apart. In the moments when I start to flag a little bit and start to become less disciplined, I have a few tactics I use. The first one is the Pomodoro method. I set 45-minute timers. I've been doing that since my PhD. I do kind of 1, 2, depends on the project, 1, 2, 3 sessions of the Pomodoro method. And that works extraordinarily well for me. So that I swear by that. The other is I run or exercise or walk as much as I can, especially in the spring and summer. So, but after lunch, before the sort of 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m. crash comes, I try to get my energy up to get me across the line to do a little bit more. And that helps quite a bit. That goes a long way. And that combination of things tends to do it. And I track it all in a very, very fancy notebook that I bought at the bookstore, and with this pen. And that's it. Another thing I rely on is every day I have a list of, here are the things I have to do today in order I have to do them. And at the end of the day, I make the list for the next day. And at the start of the week, I list everything I got to do that week. And then I just cross it off. And I got to tell you, I think like 30% of my productivity comes from the just fundamental desire I have every day to cross things off my list. That's a big reward, right? To just go, there's something universally pleasant about crossing stuff off a list.
I would do something and I put it in my to-do list and then check it.
Yeah, well, that counts. But this is the book I use. It's just a little black book, and I don't think there's anything secret here, but it just kind of looks like that. And I just mark it down, cross it off, and it works. It works really well.
Right. And that comes to like, if for anyone who is considering to go through your career path, what kind of skill set would you say they should have? Is there some big no if you have this kind of personality, or not personality, or some trait, then you shouldn't go there?
Well, it depends on what kind of writing you want to do, or podcasting or whatever. I mean, books tend to require slightly different skills and sometimes than other forms of writing. Different forms of journalism require different skills. There's a few things, though, that are extraordinarily important across everything I do, whether it's podcasting, articles, reported articles, opinion articles, books, magazine article, whatever it might be. And the first thing above all is a curiosity. I mean, you've got to fundamentally want to know things about things. And that could be a very narrow range of things or a very broad range of things. For me, it's a very broad range of things. I write about, so for give you an example, I write in business sections, I write in editorial sections, I write in arts sections, I write in travel sections. I write for pretty much business sections. I write for pretty much every section of the newspaper one time or another, because the stuff I'm interested in and think about kind of fits here, there, and everywhere. But that requires a lot of reading and a lot of talking to people. I find interviews sort of difficult to get going because I'm introverted by nature. Once they're going, I feel a lot better, but I'm fundamentally an introvert. So that comes slightly difficult to me, but it's a big part of the job. So I push myself to do it. That's a pretty big part. You've got to want to also talk to people, or at least be able to talk to people, because otherwise the job is very, very tough. So those things are fundamentally important. And of course, the reading becomes another critical part of it too, because it's through reading that we learn to write. I mean, every writer starts out by reading and by mimicking some, either consciously or not consciously, some other writer or group of writers. So, reading becomes central to that as well. And you've got to be able to take criticism. That's another big part of things. I mean, you've just absolutely got to get used to rejection, because it's going to happen through criticism by way of edits. Sometimes I've had a very positive experience, but sometimes people have less of a positive experience with editors. A criticism from the public, because you're writing for a public who are going to have thoughts, some of them very, very nasty. And that becomes a big part of the job too. So you've got to develop, I don't want to say thick skin, because that feels like you just, don't even think about it. You can't help but think about it. But tactics and strategies to manage various forms of criticism becomes difficult.
And public ones.
Yes, big time. Public ones indeed. Yeah. And then of course you've got to be okay with uncertainty, because the industry is tough. It's uncertain. You get a gig for now, it could be gone tomorrow or the next week or the next month or the next year. So you've got to be able to stick and move, which is tough. And you've got a lot of freedom with this job. You can pick and choose what you write, when you write it, who you write it for. But with that freedom comes a lot of uncertainty, because you really just don't know if you're going to be able to do it month to month. I'm in a position now where I know that I can, and I've got steady relationships with lots of different people, because I've made a lot of different bets on where to go. And these days I get pitched more often than I pitch, so I'm in a really good spot. But that took a long time. But even that could disappear. So you've got to be comfortable with that uncertainty, and you've got to be diligent about managing your time and your attention and your money. This is something we often don't talk about, but if you're going to do a kind of freelance style writing career, especially if you're doing books, you've got to really be good at budgeting, because especially with a book, you might get an advance, but a lot of your income is kicked down the road, right? And so you've got to be good at saving, at budgeting. I have an accountant. I am a big fan of farming out things like that to other people if you can afford it, because it ends up paying for itself, and it takes a lot of the pressure off you to think things through and figure out all the little bits and pieces that are sometimes very difficult to navigate. So all that goes into this gig, and ultimately you've also have to at least have some sense of enjoying working with other people. It's a solitary life in a lot of ways, but not universally. And the stuff you create isn't just yours. You're creating it with other people. And whether you like it or not, that's just part of it. You've got an editor, you've got copywriters, you've got other journalists you're learning from, you've got sources you're talking to, you've got people you're reading. It's a collective thing, whether you think about it as such or not. So you've got to have some capacity to work with other people, and ideally to enjoy that process.
Well, I never knew that's how it's like to be a journalist and book writer.
At least as a freelancer, as a staff journalist is a little different, but then again, there's a lot of layoffs, and it doesn't always pay particularly well. So I think the same rules apply even if you're a staff journalist.
So for the last piece of advice, if you want to give to our audience who just trying to get started, what would you say to them?
If you're trying to get started as a writer or a podcaster or an author, the fact is you've got to do the thing. And you could sit around all day, every day, and ask yourself, how does this happen? There doesn't seem to be any clear path to becoming one of these people. And that's true. There isn't a clear path. There's 1,000 different paths. But the thing you got to do is create something. You can talk about it all day long. Oh, I'm a writer. I'm a podcaster. What do you write? Well, I'm not, I haven't written anything yet. Well, then, you become a writer through the act of writing. I'm not snobby about it. The bar is real low, but you have to write something. That's the minimum. You write something, you can be a writer, but you got to write something. And that's what you do. And you go out there and you say, okay, say you wanted to be an opinion writer, what you do is you come up with a list of places you might want to write, and you come up with a bunch of topics you think you have something smart to say something about, and then you start pitching those places day after day after day, week after week, and you're persistent about it. Ditto with podcasts. You go and either you pitch it to someone or you create your own and you produce something that's good, and then try to go and hustle and sell it, because selling it becomes a big part of this job, like it or not, as well, marketing it, which means social media. So you've got to be kind of adept at social media too. Certainly when you're starting. Maybe there are some folks who manage to do it without social media once they're established, but not too many. So you've got to be adept at navigating that too. But the fundamental thing is to start doing it, and not to be afraid to ring people up or email people and ask for help or a connection, or for them to read something, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get it all the time, and I say yes as often as I can. And some people say no, but lots of people will say yes. And so you've got to be good at reaching out to folks and asking for help, because you just will never do it alone. And again, if you get up every day and you work on pieces and you pitch pieces, and then when you get your shot, you make it count by writing something good and on time, then all of a sudden one day you'll wake up and say, oh, this is what I do now. People are pitching me. It used to be that maybe 1 in 20 things would get picked up, 1 in 10. Now it's like 8 in 10 right now. Now my pitch rate now, if I were to pitch, 8 out of 10 things will be a yes. It used to be kind of
people already know you now, right?
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. But that takes a lot of time, and it takes the act of sitting down every day and doing it, and to be okay with the rejection. We all know these stories of famous authors who have just piles and piles of rejection. Stephen King used to have up in his room a nail in the wall, and he would pin all of the rejection slips he got. That's part of it. But if you're persistent and you do good work, then the probability of success goes way, way up.
Thank you. This is such a great advice. Just start doing something.
And if you don't know
doing something,
100%, that is it. And you might, if you don't know what that is, then your job tomorrow is to go and find out what that is. And you do that by going out there and looking at what exists and saying, what about the stuff out there do you like? Who do you like? What sort of thing do you like? What resonates with you? And if you don't find anything, well, then that tells you something. Maybe something's missing. And if something's missing in that space, maybe that's your job is to go fill that niche, right? So, but the point is, you've got to go out there and look for stuff, and don't be afraid to ask for help in that process, because again, it is a collective process, despite the myth of the sort of solitary author.
Thank you so much for giving us such good advice. And David, so nice to see you again and see you so successful now. So proud.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to see you too. I'm so proud
to actually meet you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, and have a great night, everyone.